Cher Michel Barnier, nous vous remercions. Thank you so much for your introductory remarks. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I have an incredible long list of people who would like to ask questions and speak. I have agreed with Michel Barnier that he will accept contributions of 3 colleagues and then he would like to answer. So it's not a long list of colleagues, but always lots of 3. And I'll try and make it as interesting as possible. So may I ask you to be as short and precise as possible, always to be fair, also to be fair to colleagues who also are waiting to speak. We begin with a national parliamentary speaker, Baroness Armstrong from the UK.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here from the House of Lords. If I was in the Commons, I'd sort of be a bit preoccupied today. But I am here really to reflect on certainly what Michel Barnier has said, but also on the report that the House of Lords produced last week, I think it was, about future relationships between the EU and the UK. We called it Beyond Brexit, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I hope that you can take what I'm going to say in that spirit. The report is quite comprehensive and points out that there are 3 main areas, in addition to a sense what Michel Barnier was saying. There are 3 main areas, key elements of future relationships. Firstly, notwithstanding the uncertainty, to put it mildly, of where the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration are in the UK Parliament, that the governance mechanisms contained within there, within the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration, offer us a real structure for future dialogue that is likely to persist in any deal that is agreed. We believe that we have to work these things through very carefully and taking account of where Michel Barnier finished, that actually we have to do that in a way that actually engages beyond the formal structure, engages people who are concerned about their future, about their economic future, and so on. So that we're able to really bring much more support for real cooperation. Secondly, of course, there are less formal, but nonetheless very important ways, and again, the issues around defence, security, and the other agencies that the UK will inevitably not be fully part of, but nonetheless will need to have a relationship. We have to work out how they work and how the UK representation in Brussels is really working effectively, even if we're not a member. And finally...
Baroness Armstrong,
yeah?
I'm awfully sorry, but I have to be very strict on time. It's 2 minutes. Could you please come to an end?
Well, what I really wanted to say was that there are huge challenges internationally, and we are in this trouble because of narrow nationalism, identity politics, and populism. The referendum took place during the EU migrant crisis, and we have suffered from that, but it's been built on and exploited by extremes on the right and the left, and that faces every country, and we really have to make sure that together we work in ways which address those issues to make sure that democracy and cooperation, in a way that the EU was set up, actually are able to flourish in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we Europeans have been very friendly to our British partners. It's 2 minutes from now on, and my next speaker is our Scottish-British colleague, Alan Smith.
Well, thank you, President. As you know, the Scots are people of few words, but we make them count. I don't think today's a grand speechifying day or a day for grand rhetoric, so 2 very precise questions to our negotiator. I'd also very warmly add my own sentiments to you for maintaining the discipline and the unity of purpose across the 27 EU member states. I express my general feeling of sadness about Brexit, but also a sense of embarrassment at the chaos into which Westminster has descended. So I'm sorry that you must respect the UK's constitution and deal with the interlocutors you have been forced to deal with, but I'm afraid you'll need to bear with us a little bit longer. But I think you're right in that no deal has become more likely in the last 24 hours. I think that remains very much on the table, and it's a matter of very great regret. I and colleagues across the House have raised previously the prospect of, in a no-deal scenario, can we treat the citizens' rights provisions as a standalone treaty? Because there's too many people are a hostage to this process. I don't mean Mrs May, though she is, but there's too many citizens are in real trouble in their daily lives about this, and we must give them clarity. We must be ready to be the bigger party in this. Also on the future relationship and the financial provisions of it, I hear with interest your 5 proposals of structured cooperation on defence, but also in terms of the financial arrangements for participation by the UK in future EU programmes. I'm conscious that there isn't necessarily a settled will across the Commission and the Member States about the financial arrangements of that, but perhaps you could shed some light on what we're expecting as we get into the future negotiations, if we actually get to that point at all.
Thank you, Alan. And the third speaker for 2 minutes is Ms. Biro from Romania.
Thank you, first of all, for this interparliamentary committee meeting, and congratulations for the annual report. And let me explain deep appreciation for Mr. Barnier for his work and his teamwork, which is a huge one. Let me allow me to continue in my country's language. Obiectivul principal și major.
The main and major objective is to have an orderly exit of the UK and to have a strategic relationship and a very specific relationship between the EU and the UK. We need to give priority in this process to strengthening the unity of EU 27 while basing ourselves on the main principles of the Union. We expect concrete steps from the government of the UK. The impact of Brexit will be great from an economic and a legal point of view, but we are relying on the UK's engagement to EU security. I believe that we can meet in the middle on security and defense based on shared interest and common European values. Romania will support a strengthened partnership in the external and foreign policy of the EU with the UK, focusing on the strategic interests of the EU, and we will have a strong bilateral partnership which will be according to these principles. Thank you.
Mulțumesc. So, the first round, Michel.
Merci, David.
Thank you, David. Ms. Bureau, first of all, what you're saying and what your wishes are on behalf of your country, which of course is in a key position given your strategic location in Europe, is very important for us, but it does show very well the nature of the problem. If I would say to Baroness Armstrong, what we want, and this is really getting down to the nitty-gritty, what I've been trying to put to you to date, we need, and this is our common interest, to have a strategic partnership with the UK. And we have all the aspects we need. We've got the ingredients, if you like. We've got the framework, thanks to the political statement, things that we have in common then. And it's not contradictory, on the contrary. What bilaterally Romania or Germany or France or any other country, Estonia, Lithuania, might want to do, and what it's already doing with the UK. Bilateral cooperation will continue on policies, on programs, on capacities, cooperation within NATO for those EU member states who are members of NATO. That's not the case for all member states of the EU, of course, and that will continue. And that's why we're still worried about the future of NATO at the same time. However, what is being brought into question is we need to organise the way the UK leaves, because they want to leave. We need to look at its capacity to participate, to remain part and parcel of certain programs or initiatives of the European Union. Baroness Armstrong, obviously, I have to tell the truth, that it's obviously not the same thing being a member of the EU and not being a member of the EU. It cannot be business as usual, neither here nor in other areas of policy. We have to find other ways and means to cooperate, and that's what we've tried to thrash out. I've talked about strategic partnerships. I illustrated 5 tools that could be applied, and that already would guarantee a political and strategic dialogue. But there are ramifications, Baroness Armstrong. Your country has decided to leave the European Union, the single market, the customs union to date. You will also be leaving 750 international agreements. 750 international agreements, legally, expressly, Euratom, Europol, all the agencies, all the trade agreements. That is a natural corollary of your decision to leave, and there will be consequences of that. I don't think I need to go on at greater length about the nature of what's going on in the UK, the impasse or political crisis they might be experiencing, but more deeply, it's not just about the question of Brexit. I don't think it is just the question of Brexit and the agreement that's on the table and the backstop for Ireland. It is much broader than that. Somewhere along the line, it's a crisis that could equally have sprung up in a different country. Ms. Alliot-Marie or Mr. Bizet would say, in my country as well, there are questions about what our relationship is to the world, in the world. What's our place in the European Union? What's our economic model? These are all things that are coming out of as a result of the British debate as well. To Alan Smith, I would say, yes, I will continue to respect the British parliamentary debate. I do listen to you very often when you take the floor. And it's quite invigorating, I have to say.
Mais je continue.
But I will continue to stick by my line. I regret Brexit. In my attitude, in my words, you will never find any attempt to humiliate, to be aggressive, or to come up with any form of vengeance or vengeful wording. You'll never find that. But now is high time for you to take your responsibilities. The decision of the European Council last week is basically trying to say that. It's opening up the path for the UK for it to assume its own responsibilities. Either you approve the withdrawal agreement to leave in an orderly fashion, and this agreement is the only way to do that because it's been done on an objective and legal basis, or you do not have an agreement, you do not want an agreement, you choose to leave without an agreement. That's a choice of the UK, and it's their responsibility if they choose to leave without an agreement. Or you decide to ask for extra time for negotiating, but you have to explain why. Is it for a new referendum? Is it for a new general election? Is it for some political process of a cross-border nature, cross-party nature, sorry? I don't know. What I do know is that the European Union heads of state and government have looked at this issue of extending the time, and they will inevitably ask why you want to extend that. Invariably, you would also have to organise European elections for May, necessarily, if you ask for an extension. I don't think I'll say more than that today. There is the question of the financial agreement. If there's no deal, I think basically that's what you're driving at, isn't it? If there's no deal.
S'il y a un deal.
Well, if there's a deal, we'll implement the commitments we've taken together to protect citizens, their rights, 4.5 million people, that's our priority. And the financial elements will fall into place according to that. That's why we have a transition for at least 2 years up until the end of the 2020 budgetary period and then beyond. If there's no deal, well, first of all, the atmosphere will be different. The lack of deal means a lack of faith. A lack of deal means a rupture in confidence between us. And I think we have to have confidence in order to build a future relationship. But in that position, your country will have to have relations with us, and we with them. There won't be many months passing before the UK will start asking for negotiations on a free trade agreement or on other issues, on transport. What I could say, or reiterate maybe, is on this subject, the topics of Brexit will still be there. Ireland, financial resolution of this, the legal obligations of the UK, the issue of citizens and citizens' rights. These are questions that we'll put again and again. If there is no deal and the UK wants to discuss trade or other subjects, we will put the same subjects back on the table. These are genuine issues. Citizens, Ireland, financial obligations. Next round.
Okay, the next three speakers are from the European Parliament, Mr. Salafranca, then Mr. Angel from Luxembourg, and then Mr. Freund.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you. Well, I would like to agree with what was said by the President of the Commission on behalf of the EPP and express our recognition of the serious and responsible work which has been done in very difficult situation in an increasingly interlinked world facing major geostrategic threats. And in this context, Mr. Barnier, I would like to clearly ask you, not just under the terms of a potential agreement for the future, but often what we're dealing with now is preparing for the future. And so we're wondering what's going to happen between now and the 12th of April. My first question would be to know, if there is no deal and then there is a withdrawal without an agreement, what will happen? What will happen to all of the topics that are being dealt with in the withdrawal agreement? Now, a second hypothesis would be, and it would seem that after the votes from yesterday, this seems to be likely, would be to once again look at the agreement, put it on the table again and re-examine it. And finally, as you were saying, there was this possibility which was lost by 3 votes of remaining within the customs union. So my question linked to this would be, should we consider renegotiating an other agreement on the basis of the current agreement? And if this were to happen, would we reconsider the discussions that are taking place? Because essentially any discussion would require further time. So what hypothetical situation would best suit the European Union, which is, of course, what we're ultimately aiming at is an agreement? Thank you.
Thank you, Ignacio. Mr. Angel from Luxembourg.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais remercier Monsieur Barnier d'avoir toujours accordé.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm grateful to Mr. Barnier for always attaching so much importance and above all time to dialogue with national parliaments. It's been our honour to host him 3 times in the Luxembourg Chamber of Deputies. That has not only helped our members, it's also been useful in the eyes of public opinion via the media. Our citizens have realised that Europe is more than a peace project or an economic project. Above all, it's a project for citizens. And it's thanks to these negotiations and your presence that many Europeans have realised what we stand to lose without Europe. The way you worked has also no doubt helped ensure unity amongst the 27. With that in mind, may I ask you for your assessment of the risk of that unity dissolving further down the road when negotiating our future relationship with the United Kingdom? What's to be done to ensure that we retain that unity in years to come? And lastly, as part of those negotiations on the future relationship with the United Kingdom, have you already pinpointed certain sensitive issues which might undermine the unity of the 27 that we've known up until now? In closing, may I say, I hope that the Barnier method of full transparency will catch on and inform future negotiations in every area of EU life. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. And now our colleague, Mr. Freund from Austria, from the European Parliament.
Thank you very much. At the outset, let me thank you, Monsieur Barnier, for this extraordinary work you have undertaken. And I guess that when you started, you never thought of being here on April 2nd and explaining to us what would have happened on March 29th. I have said this after the second Brexit deal vote in the UK Parliament, and I say this before the possible fourth vote on the Brexit deal. I do not understand how it is perfectly clear and perfectly legitimate to vote 4 times on the same subject in Parliament within, what, a span of 2 months or so, but that the same politicians who argue for introducing a bill 4 times decline to have a second referendum 3 years after the people voted. Perhaps this has to do with the fact that the Conservatives fear a British participation in the EU election like the devil fears the holy water, as this would mean that Labour members would come back to this House and increase the strength of the social democratic movement here in the Parliament. I don't know whether you would agree with that or not. And let me say, because this is my last time here at the AFET meeting, let me thank you, David, for the great and impartial work that you have undertaken while I was here and since you took over this. And I wish all the members of the AFET committee all the best, and I hope they would keep on working for a strong, self-assured, common foreign policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Freund. Final meeting. Indeed. Thank you for those kind words.
Speaker, do you accept 4? Because perhaps we will hear a different British view now. Lord Kinnell from the House of Lords.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It struck me what a warm welcome we had today. I must say I was pretty apprehensive arriving. Democratic machinery is very delicate, and ours is broken temporarily, and I can tell you, I think others have been in the same position, there's nothing more painful, and we're pretty scarred. I don't think I can add anything to the near-term analysis that you can all read on the BBC. But in the medium-term analysis, I was listening very carefully to Monsieur Barnier just now, and reflecting just how much work is required in the medium term to evolve, and that is both an evolution of the EU-UK relationship as described by Monsieur Barnier, and very much an evolution of the EU itself, because it is important to address the concerns that gave rise to the 52% of British electors who voted to come out, because those concerns do exist in other countries, and if those concerns are not addressed, there will be problems ahead for the EU. But I think it is very vital to bring the national parliaments along as this evolution process comes, not least because, of course, most of the decisions will be ones that require unanimity for the treaties, and I noted the plural word there, that are likely to result out of the UK-EU bit alone. And it won't be a question of qualified majority voting. In the longer term, however, the common objective of all parliamentarians is the pursuit of peace and prosperity for our electorate, or in the case of the House of Lords, of our fellow citizens. What was very pleasing for me in the guest list today was to see that Norway is here. Norway is, of course, not a member of the EU, and I very much hope that we will be invited in the future to sit in this forum, as I feel very comfortable and very European. In any event, and it's often misquoted, Mr. Churchill, one of our great Europeans, felt that meeting was better and jaw to jaw was better as a way forward.
Thank you. So, second round, Michel.
Oui. Je souriais, Lord Kinnell.
Well, you referred to Norway. I would like to come back to this point. Now, first of all, Norway chose not to become a member of the EU. even though it was proposed and negotiations were carried out for accession. But Norway chose not to be a member, but to be a stakeholder and part of the single market. And they're doing quite well as a result of it. So it's not an autonomous national market, it's a market which contributes to the strength of the European single market. I have a lot of sympathy for Norway, and I have some Norwegian staff on my right-hand side. Now, you referred to the difficulties of the discussions in the UK, as Mr. Freund also did. I won't refer to those difficulties, nor will I refer to the procedures in Britain, which we respect. They may be surprising, as you said, Mr. Freund, to have these successive votes, and it may not even be finished, these successive votes. I've been informed that there might be a new series of indicative votes after yesterday's votes, and this may take place by the end of the week. So the process hasn't reached an end, and we're attentive to that process, because for as long as there may be a possibility, while respecting British law, for the British to reach an agreement, to assume the responsibility of this agreement, then we will do whatever we can to support that. But this is a serious crisis, as I said earlier on to Baroness Armstrong. And nobody is pleased about this situation. Nobody can be pleased with what's happening in the UK currently. Lord Kennel, yes, we need energy, regardless of the circumstances. If everything is going well, this will help us open up the negotiations, and I hope that this will happen as quickly as possible. And we are ready for that, Lord Kennan. The European Commission will carry out these negotiations on behalf of the European Union in all domains, all of the domains which are referred to in the text. A whole series, about 12 tables of different things going on at the same time. And all of this, we are looking at the mandate for negotiation, and we will open up these 10 or 12 tables for negotiation. We will coordinate them in all of the domains: trade, cooperation for transport, police and judicial cooperation, security, defence. We're ready for this. We don't have much time. We are talking about the 21 period of transition. If lengthened, this may be 3 or 4 periods. Even 3 or 4 years is short for negotiations. When you look at the negotiations we had with Canada and Japan and the time that took. Now, Lord Kennan, I would also like to say, I'm stepping out of my role of negotiator here. Now, I'm not a technocrat, I'm a politician. I needed to draw the lessons from Brexit. I think it's not too late to listen to our citizens who are worried, who are expressing social or territorial anger. This is something we need to listen to. These are the challenges of the next years for the next term of office of the European Parliament. Thank you, Mr. Angel, for your comments. I appreciate your comments, but well, this unit didn't just appear. It's linked to the political will. And so this unity that we're working towards, it's something that we've built. This new American attitude to Europe, this geopolitical situation around the Mediterranean, Libya and Syria, we have influences from Russia and China. All of this creates a sense of responsibility, of seriousness, which I think even more than in the past creates the idea that we need to work together. We need to work together to face these challenges. It's one for all and all for one, rather than trying everyone to go their own way. We regret the UK's decision to go its own way, but we are going to work in solidarity, but at the same time change what needs changing. Now, for the future, unity in future, we need to have trust. We will, of course, have discussions. There will be diverging opinions because with the 27 members do not all have the same connection to the UK, culturally, economically, or the same interests even. But what's at heart is the integrity of the single market. Earlier on, I was answering a question from a Sky News journalist in a different discussion, asking if I was being too strict and what concessions Europe would make. Now, I explained that in these negotiations, this wasn't a typical trade negotiation. There's no bargaining going on. We are not compromising the single market. The British know this because they built the single market with us over 44 years. The single market is the reason why the American president, the Chinese president respect us. It's not just this free, an area for freedom, free circulation of goods. It's not just about all of this. You have supervision, you have jurisdictions above this, so you cannot be part in, part out. You have to respect the rules, but also take advantage of the benefits. And this is what I explained. So this is why when you have companies from all of our countries, this is the future of all of our companies and countries which is affected. Now, we were talking about checkers, a system which would be half of the customs union. So it would be the benefits but not the advantages. You're talking about 25% of the customs alignment on. So there were a whole series of measures which were only part measures. It wouldn't be fair for our companies who are respecting the rules, hoping that they will benefit from the advantages. So it's not, I'm not being dogmatic. I'm not being too strict. This is a withdrawal process. So we're not going to undermine our own identity, our own community, because the UK is leaving. It's as simple as that. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Salafranca, for your support. I think I answered the issue of the budget from Mr. Smith earlier on. This issue will continue for any future discussion that the British want to carry out with us. Those problems remain. Citizens, Ireland, the financial payments. And these are the issues that will keep cropping up until we get an answer, so that we can once again build trust to work on. The legal basis will remain valid. We've done the best work we can possibly do, so we will use the elements of this agreement. But there won't be a mini deal. If there is an overall no deal, a break of trust, a lot of turbulence on the British side, and I'm sure there will also be consequences for us, although we're prepared for it. And then our colleagues will come back to us, and then we will have to discuss these topics. We'll have to rebuild this trust. And this is why, ladies and gentlemen, we're not yet at the end of the process. And President Juncker had said that our patience had reached an end. But I think we're a little bit from the end. We still have a little bit of patience. We'll work. We hope that the British Parliament will do what it can to ratify this agreement. Perhaps they may ask us to amend the political declaration. Perhaps improvements can be made. This can be done over a period of days or weeks. This is possible. We can be more ambitious in all of the areas of this political declaration. But I really hope that we won't just abandon all of the work that's been done, because for a withdrawal and to take place in an orderly manner, this is the only possibility.
Thank you, Michel. It's keep calm and carry on indicative voting. And we have still lots of time, and we're very interested. We're following the procedures in the House of Commons with utter admiration. We now come to our next four speakers. Is that okay? Charles Tannock, then Mr. Bizet, then Mr. Nart, and then Mr. Kovac. Peaceful.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, speaking entirely personally, because I represent the minority pro-European views within the Conservative delegation regarding the whole Brexit shambles, I agree with you, Michel Barnier. To me, Brexit's been a very selfish and destructive process and pretty pointless. I totally agree. But the United Kingdom does have a security surplus. You know, we are P5 members, a nuclear power, a very effective armed forces, the special relationship with the United States, the links from the Commonwealth. And so the EU was part of our architecture in security and defence and foreign affairs. And having that truncated now is going to be very painful, and it is indeed lose-lose. And only last week we saw the closure of the UNAV for Atalanta base in my own London constituency, which was an excellent example of a successful UK-led CSDP naval operation to defeat piracy. For the last 3 years on my committee, in this committee, I've advocated that the UK has a very close security partnership with the 27. I first suggested that the UK could enjoy observer status within the PSC committee back in February of 17. I also suggested reinventing the Western European Union. None of these ideas would fly. But right now we have no idea after last night's vote in the Commons where Brexit will end. There may be a meaningful vote for. I somehow doubt Mrs May has the numbers, but I'm hoping there's a long extension now possible with a second referendum. Remember, the second referendum vote was the largest supported one last night in terms of the number of votes, only narrowly defeated. So, you know, where are we going to go next with security to avoid the security cliff edge? And it's not just about external security, also internal security. The UK has enjoyed the protection afforded by the Schengen Information System, the Prüm Convention, the ECRI, the Eurojust membership, Europol, passenger name records, European arrest warrant. All this goes out of the window if we have a no deal. It's much easier to work with CFSP and CSDP. So how do we solve the internal security matters, Michel Barnier, if there is a no deal? How do we stay having access to the databases? Just one big question, for instance.
Thank you, Charles Tannock. And now Jean Bizet from France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, first of all, as with many others here, I'd like to thank Michel Barnier for his work and his commitment. I'd like to welcome that. I'd like to pick up on one of the last indicative votes yesterday in the House of Commons on the customs union. Now, the customs union, if my reading's correct, failed by a few votes, but was very different to the 25th of November agreement because it doesn't refer to the backstop. So, Mr. Barnier, as you said, the single market, the biggest market in the world, is something completely different. If you want to work just on the economy, well, that's a value as well. And if I can refer to the conclusion of the Chequers seminar from the 6th of July, our British friends thought they could imagine that subsequent to their departure from the EU, they could carry out multiple dumping styles. And if I read this in conjunction with the statement by the American Secretary of State for Foreign Trade, Mr. Robert Lexinger, who suggested to our British friends to work on a 30 billion trade deal on agro-food, a 30 billion agro-food deal with the US that have to change the laws that they've adhered to date. Now, would the EU 27 have accepted that without the safety net? And if they wouldn't have accepted that, is there not just a problem for our UK friends being faced with the no deal that we might indeed face?
Next speaker is Javier Nat.
Gracias, David.
Thank you, David. I share all the concerns that we've heard voiced here by pro-European members, and I'm one of them. I needn't repeat them. But of course, it's completely surreal. It's like something out of Kafka that just a couple of minutes before falling over the cliff edge, I don't know, from the 12th of April, we're talking about plans and projects. You've had 2 years. And in the face of this political chaos in the United Kingdom, we find ourselves in a situation analogous to that of someone who's drowning. Someone tries to rescue him, and very often they pull them down. They both end up drowning. Because what's at stake is not just the United Kingdom. There's a threat here to the European Union as well. Clearly, it seems there's not likely to be any different agreement, but there's going to have to be an agreement. There are two unknowns here. Elections in the UK, why? What proposals would be taken into those elections if there's this huge internal chaos and they've not managed to emerge from that over a period of 2 years? And then secondly, there's the idea of extra time. Well, that's going to create huge chaos within the European Union. First of all, because that means that Britain will have to take part in the elections to the European Parliament, which will give us a wonderful situation where 10% of the members of this House will be helping create rules and legislation, or opposing it, with 1 foot in and 1 foot out. We're going to have members from Britain being part of the governance of Europe when they want to be outside the European Union. It's a contradiction in terms. And this could lead to failure and send out a message of chaos. And that's something very dangerous for the European Union. Lastly, I'm so concerned that in order to save the tactical position with the strategy, Farage said something that's true. He said he wanted to do away with the European Union. But Brexit could also bring about a fundamental political crisis in the United Kingdom vis-à-vis Scotland and Northern Ireland. That has to be borne in mind.
Gracias, Javier Nart. And finally, Miro Kovac. Molim.
Thank you, Chair. Je voudrais d'abord complimenter Monsieur Barnier.
Well, first of all, allow me to thank Mr. Barnier for the work he's done on behalf of the European Union. And actually, it's irony that 50 years ago, Charles de Gaulle was opposed to the UK's joining the single market, and today we have a Frenchman who would absolutely want the UK to remain part of the EU. But, well, that's history. Dear friends, I think you rightly accented the idea, the fact that the idea behind this is to weaken the EU, to show that you can live and exist without the European Union. But I think that we, and as has been said, I would like to ask you a question. Do you see a risk that some might choose to follow the Brexit model if it were to turn out that the UK were to function well after leaving the EU? Thank you.
Thank you, Michel. Can we, after that, do one more round? But then we would go through all.
Short.
Okay.
One or two questions. We'll try to be precise and short. Monsieur Kovac, d'abord, j'étais.
Well, Mr. Kovac, first of all, I was impressed. I'm impressed by your comparison. When I was making this gesture, well, I think I'm trying to be humble. I'm here because of and thanks to General de Gaulle, but I was very young back then. I would ask you not to make any inappropriate comparisons. And even though I was a part of the new president was part of the Gaullist party, after the departure, the new president called for a referendum to allow the UK to join, and there was a vote in favour, and I think that this was the right decision because there is strength in unity. Now, Mr. Kovac, what I can say is that objectively, there's a certain number of political stakeholders, decision makers across the European Union who are calling for the country to leave the euro or to leave the European Union. These countries are not calling for this any longer. This is something I've noticed. But we haven't carried out the negotiations with that in mind. We're not trying to punish anyone or to avenge anything. I've always tried to be as impassive as possible and to stick to the legal basis, to figures, to facts, and to tackle all of the legal problems thrown up by the Brexit process. I will continue in that process, in that vein, to try to be as objective as possible. And as I said earlier on to the members of the House of Lords who are here, the fact that the UK is leaving 750 agreements, is leaving the customs union, it has a whole series of consequences that weren't explained during the run-up to the referendum, and now this is being dealt with. We're dealing with this aftermath. I would also like to say to Javier Nart that yes, the time has come to take care of the European Union. I said this earlier. And Mr. Nart, I even said that any prolongation, if requested, will compel the UK to carry out European Union elections on its territory, so in the month of May. But this will also extend a period of uncertainty. So there is a political cost, but also an economic cost. And it is my responsibility to recall that point. Then it will be the decision of European leaders. If this question is raised by the British government, well, we will have to think, why do they need this period to be lengthened? There may be objective reasons to organise a new referendum or to organise new elections, or perhaps even a new political process. We can imagine that they might need that time. So it's not time that we need, it's time that the British need to get their political process completed. But all of this has a cost, beyond the fact that there is a paradox, obviously. When you want to leave the EU, you're at the table at all political levels to defend your opinion. But, well, this is the rule. You have the rule of law. The UK is a member of the EU. It has all of the rights and obligations, and so it is present at the negotiating table. And so I hope that in the coming days a voice will be found. This agreement will be approved, and that we will open the door to start the new negotiations. So thank you, Jean Biget, for your comments. Now, of course, I do follow the votes on the customs union, for example. But, Jean, I would just like to say objectively that if the UK were to ask to be part of the customs union, this is a customs union. It's not the same as the common market. So the customs union would be with Turkey plus agro-food products, and in this case the UK would be part of that market for goods. So there would be no bilateral discussions with Americans except via the European Union. So I hope that's clear. And even if there weren't a customs union, if we had a free trade agreement with the UK, as we are willing to achieve as part of the political agreement, we want to have a level playing field. We're not going to have a whole series of different regulations. Now, you know that a free trade agreement with the UK would be something exceptionally new. We've already negotiated 30 to 40 trade agreements recently with Japan, Canada, and Korea. Now, we're achieving regulatory convergence. We're bringing our standards and our rules closer to one another's level. But for the UK, this would be the opposite, where they're completely integrated today thanks to the common market, and then there will be divergence. So what are we going to do with this regulatory divergence? Will it remain at a reasonable, controlled level, or will it be a method to use to ensure dumping, social, environmental, whatever kind of dumping? We're not naive, and we have measures to ensure that we can control this divergence, and we will be aiming for a level playing field. Now, Charles Tannock, whom I know well, once again,
unfortunately. So we have to know, we have to assume the consequences of the Brexit. And for example, to be an observer in the COPS or the PSC would not be possible. I'm sorry to say that. Nous avons aussi à tenir compte.
We must also bear in mind our relations with other third countries in this specific case. So what we're giving to one third country, we need to be willing to give it to other third countries, and that will engender other problems. So I think we need to be realistic. Of course, yes, we do need agreement to ensure trust. But I really feel that what we've set in the political declaration, the 5 cooperation mechanisms, we're not trying to do more or do something different. We have these 5 mechanisms, and if we can implement those 5 mechanisms in a spirit of good faith and good cooperation, I think we can get a lot done. And we can make the most of the British input to help cooperate and achieve the security of our European Union. I'm sure of this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, it's 11:30 and Commissioner Hahn is waiting already outside, so I'm very sorry, but I can't give the floor to further colleagues. I managed to cover all national parliamentarians, but I apologize to our MEPs. Perhaps there's another opportunity to speak to Michel in the plenary week in Strasbourg. Let me just finally say a few words. Michel, this is important for us, that in the end, if the UK should approve the withdrawal agreement, it's the European Parliament which will have the final say. We are expected to vote on giving our consent or not giving our consent, and the Foreign Affairs Committee will provide its opinion on the matter. And when we then discuss future EU-UK relations, it will be the Foreign Affairs Committee which is ready to start fulfilling our role as the lead committee in full cooperation with the Brexit Steering Group, in line with its remit as defined by the rules of procedure. And this will be our duty anyhow, whether there's a deal or not. So let me finally thank you for coming to this meeting today, for this exchange, and once again a warm welcome and a warm thank you to you and your team for the great work over the past years in defending our interests. We look forward to welcoming you soon again. Bye-bye.